Our next speaker is the Marine Corps Deputy Commandant for Programs and Resources. He is responsible for the Marine Corps' $51 billion per year. Please welcome Lieutenant General James Adams.
All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for allowing me to come today and provide stunt double duties for General Smith. In all seriousness, though, there's a palpable sense of joy across the headquarters of Marine Corps staff right now, based on the fact that on Tuesday, the Commandant signed the paperwork, the Sec Nav signed the paperwork, he's back in his fighting hole as our Commandant, and it's really motivating. Yeah, I've worked for him since he was a one-star in many jobs, and we could not ask for a better Commandant of our Marine Corps. So today's speech, presentation, I'm going to perhaps begin from an unexpected angle, particularly for a conference based on and focused on U.S. defense programs. So what I would like you to do is indulge me for a moment while I tell a story. Tomorrow, the 8th of March, marks the 162nd anniversary of an inflection point in naval warfare. For hundreds of years prior to that day, what mattered most in naval engagements was maneuvering your wooden, sail-driven ship alongside the adversaries and to deliver a broadside cannon, a cannon fire broadside. And then, on the 8th of March in 1862, the steam-powered ironclad Virginia appeared. It destroyed the sloop Cumberland, the frigate Congress, and forced another frigate, the Minnesota, to run aground. In fact, it ran the Congress aground as well. In that moment, the days of wooden navies was seemingly over. And yet, less than 12 hours later, the ironclad Monitor arrived, coming down from New York. And with its new design of a water-level deck, an armored revolving gun turret, parity was restored. It was a counter-adaptation and modernization effort that had been rapidly executed. And while many are familiar with this clash of ironclads, what they maybe are less familiar with is the fact that the U.S. Navy had been experimenting with ironclads for decades. In fact, the Navy had launched its first ironclad warship in 1843 in Lake Erie, the USS Michigan. That was almost 20 years before that. In the Marines, well, we have not been, we've been not late adapters as well. We innovate. Just ask Pete Ellis, Major Pete Ellis. He had barely gotten back from World War I when he took a leave of absence from the Marine Corps to study the Japanese developments in the Pacific. And he saw the writing on the wall. He saw what the Marine Corps would need to be able to do in the Pacific 20 years before it happened. And he wasted no time developing doctrine to support it. Now, today, we call him the father of amphibious warfare. Of course, General LtGen might challenge him for that title when he too predicted the need for large-scale amphibious operations. But Ellis, in his efforts, resisted the critics who didn't share his vision and instead boldly forged ahead with what would prove to be a decisive capability in the next peer fight. Today, defense and naval professionals are once again confronted with what appears to be an inflection point. In the early hours of February 1st this year, 6 Ukrainian drones destroyed the Russian missile ship Ivanovets in the Black Sea. And just yesterday, you've probably seen it on the news, the patrol ship Sergei Kotov was destroyed by the Ukrainian Group 13 controlled UASs. For centuries, land-based forces have challenged navies in their quest to dominate coastal seas, even if they were sometimes underestimated by their maritime opponents. And I think we all know Gallipoli is perhaps the most well-known example of this. But more often in recent history, maritime forces, U.S. Navy included, have taken advantage of their superior mobility, the range of their aircraft, and the range of their missiles to project power from the sea to the shore. We've done this thousands of times in combat operations and crisis operations around the globe. The Navy, Marine Corps, and Army island hopping campaign in World War II represents I would say, the historic apogee of power projection. But in the last 2 decades, the cost of precision weapons, that has plummeted, and advanced technologies have proliferated down below the nation state. This is a development which has so far, favored terrestrial forces. And it's really given new life to an old wisdom of Admiral Lord Nelson, who once said, "A ship's a fool to fight a fort." Look no further than the current war in Ukraine. Using small distributed ground forces, civilian and military sensors, drones, anti-ship weapons, Ukraine has destroyed 25 Russian warships, including a submarine. These are losses well in the excess of several billion US. Ukraine, without any traditional Navy ships of its own and relying exclusively on land-based forces, has eliminated 40% of Russia's naval tonnage in the Black Sea. They've broken Moscow's naval blockade of Odessa and other coastal cities, and they've created a badly needed maritime lifeline. So let's return to the ironclad example. While the popular story is that the ironclad engagement was a black swan event, it really wasn't. The Navy had been aware of emerging technologies and emerging ship designs for decades. Similarly, both the Navy and Marine Corps have been aware of emerging uncrewed surface and underwater drone capabilities for years. We just heard about some of that from the CNO. Both the Navy and the Marine Corps have been experimenting with them and rapidly seeking their procurement. Beginning in the fall of 2019, the Marine Corps identified loitering munitions and anti-ship missiles as modernization priorities. Simultaneously, we began our pursuit of the long-range unmanned surface vessel. In fact, at the time, I was the capability developer for General Neller. And we looked at a project that SCO was developing with this long-range unmanned surface vessel. And we wove it into our force design initiative. Soon after, we also began experimenting with uncrewed surface vessels for logistics. We're doing that right now. Additionally, we rapidly organized the Marine Littoral Regiment in the Pacific in Task Force 61-2 in Europe. And within 18 months, we were providing forces in 2 distinct theaters with capabilities that look a lot like what I just described the Ukrainians are doing in the Black Sea. Similarly, in September of 2021, the Navy and Fifth Fleet established Task Force 59. We heard some conversation about that during the CNO's talk. That was designed to accelerate experimentation with uncrewed systems, specifically autonomous uncrewed systems, and things that could be used in asymmetric ways from the sea. Yes, all of this that I've described occurred well before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and all before those YouTube videos have started to appear online showing the Ukrainian strikes on Russian surface ships. And lastly, before I transition, let's not forget, Sea Hunter launched in 2016 with a cruising range of over 10,000 nautical miles, and yes, that was 8 years ago. All of this, from ironclad ships to Pete Ellis to the Marine Littoral Regiments, this all supports one broad set of conclusions. First, we, the Navy and Marine Corps team, do not have an innovation problem, and we certainly don't have a culture that either fears or resists change. We embrace it. In fact, we pursue it to drive changes to the character of warfare versus the alternative, being driven by changes to the character of warfare and having to respond off our back foot. Driving those changes would not have been possible without many of the phenomenal folks in this room today and all the companies and enterprises that they represent. So, what's the problem, General Adams? Why aren't we going faster? Why aren't we keeping pace? Well, we kind of heard about it, right? Starting with the comptroller. It may not surprise you but resources remain a challenge. And I know that's causing some eye rolls here in the audience, but I want to provide a couple of reminders that are important that we haven't talked about. First, the Marine Corps when it embarked upon its force design journey back in 2019, and actually we were starting to work on it back in 2017, have self-funded all of our force design efforts for the past 4 years. That was a demand signal, a requirement on us from General Berger. We made the difficult decision and made choices, challenging choices, to free up $18 billion in resources. We paid our fair share of departmental bills, and then we reinvested $15 billion of that into accelerating modernization. Secondly, over the past 2 years, we engaged in a rigorous audit of all our accounts. The result of that effort was announced 2 weeks ago. The Marine Corps is now the first service to pass a complete financial audit, having successfully accounted for more than $46.3 billion in assets. And that was only possible through the hard work and support of thousands of dedicated Marines, civilian Marines, and many other partners across the DoD, to include the Navy and the Army. So, as the Marine Corps' resource officer, I now have an increased ability to accurately know where every cent is. But I also know where it should be, and it's not. And it is not due to budget shortfalls. At present, there is a $1.4 billion net funding shortfall between the enacted budget in '23 and the $53.2 billion FY24 President's budget request that's awaiting to be approved and enacted. If we go to a full-year CR, it introduces a $3.3 billion misalignment of funds because of restrictions on new starts, production rate increases, and appropriation rate increases. And we don't have enough general transfer authority to do the reprogramming of $3.3 billion to move money from procurement to RDT&E or to OMEN or wherever that misalignment exists. This is a 6% misalignment of our budget, and it impairs our ability to execute, let alone accelerate, our force design in the face of a pacing threat that Admiral Aquilino aptly describes as the most significant military buildup at the greatest speed since World War II, the PRC. The Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2023, it imposes an even greater impact, resulting in a sequester of funds at 1% below those FY23 levels if Congress failed to pass all 12 bills by the 31st of December last year. That task came and went. Unfortunately, this loss becomes permanent if all the bills are not passed by the 30th of April, 2024. Just let that sink in for a moment. And just magnify or understand the magnification of that problem that I'm describing, which is a very specific Marine Corps problem. How does that impact the Navy? And I think their number is about $11 billion, talking with my counterpart, Admiral Skillman, this morning. This sequester likely results in an additional $500 million in misalignment, so now we've got 3.8 misaligned, and it increases our net funding shortfall down or up to $1.9 billion. As the Commandant often notes, we didn't become Marines to do things that are easy. We became Marines to do hard things. And this is true. And I will say, passing the audit and self-funding force design are examples of doing hard things. And there are thousands of Marines, 25,000 Marines out there deployed today doing hard things, defending our way of life. But satisfying existing requirements, overcoming a period of historically high inflation, and what's more important, the resultant decrease in purchasing power, paying our Marines more, as they deserve, via the mandated pay increases that have been approved in law, as well as going faster, which is the demand of the Secretary, the combatant commanders, and our congressional leaders, all while under a continuing resolution, isn't just a hard thing. I would say it's almost mission impossible. We, and by we, I mean the Navy and Marine Corps team, need an adequate, reliable, and predictable budget. As the Assistant Commandant General Mahoney has said before, this is not parochialism, it's prioritization. And as our Secretary of the Navy, Del Toro, routinely says, our national defense strategy is naval in character and demands an increased focus on maritime statecraft as can only be exercised by the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Coast Guard. The nation, the nation, needs a more fully resourced Navy and Marine Corps now more than ever. And if all that isn't complicated enough, the demand from combatant commanders, our partners and allies, the requirement for persistent forward presence, that just continues to increase as we watch these flare-ups all around the globe. While simultaneously, we're coming off of 2 decades of sustained conflict. Yes, we've had to make hard choices. Yes, we've had to make sacrifices. I would say deferring barracks refurbishment to pay for more lethality and protection, for instance, might be an example. And regardless of how justified and righteous past decisions were in the face of real war, all the services are now dealing with the consequences. Specifically, what I'm talking about is we have to remedy systemic shortfalls in our installation portfolios and improve the quality of life of our Marines, sailors, airmen, and guardians. But doing so is simply beyond us at present, really, as both a lack of resources and the scale of the problem. We have a facility sustainment, restoration, and modernization, and you sometimes hear that referred to as FSRM, as well as MILCON shortfall in excess of $30 billion. That's the Marine Corps' kind of path to get back to where we need to be. Now, the Commandant has directed me to go back through every account, now that I can, in an attempt to squeeze an additional $1 billion in funding for barracks and restoration and modernization per year across the FIDIP. And that's my stated mission, and I've already moved out to accomplish it. That's what all of us across the services are going to have to do, to seek creative solutions to improve the quality of life for our people. And while we will use our own funds to address these challenges, we still need external support. We simply can't get there on our own. So as I wrap up, I'm going to preemptively answer what will likely be my first question, since I'm the money guy. If I had $1 extra, then where would I spend it? My answer is, well, what type of dollar is it? If it's a mil-PERS dollar, money that I can use against our manpower accounts, then it's going to go to retention bonuses, because we find those are the things that are allowing us to make our numbers when it comes to recruiting and retention bonuses. If it's a procurement dollar, then it's going to go to loitering munitions for close combat lethality. If it's an FSRM dollar, I think, based on what I just talked about, it's going to go to barracks renovation and improve the quality of life in our unhoused or unaccompanied barracks. If it's an ammunition dollar, it's going to go to a long-range precision fire capability. If it's an O&M dollar, ops and maintenance, it's going to go right to 1 MEF and 3 MEF and support their warfighting readiness and the readiness to fight the fight in the theater of consequence. And this one's going to be a little bit out of my lane, but I did talk with Admiral Skillman this morning. If it's an SCN dollar or ship purchase dollar, then it should go to a multi-year, multi-ship amphib block buy. All of those things, or any one of them, will enhance the lethality, survivability, and sustainability of what is still the nation's crisis response force of choice. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's about time for me to end and take your questions, but I've unveiled some of the most pressing issues facing your Marine Corps today. In spite, regardless of these challenges, I want to leave you with my assurance that your Marine Corps, your Marines, remain the best trained, the best equipped, and the best postured force to secure our nation interests at sea and abroad, working with our naval partners, forward deployed, deterring the fight. We are operating globally. We are supporting peacetime promotion of U.S. national security interests and prosperity. The decisive decade is upon us, and the Navy Marine Corps team are critical players on the field, just like the CNO talked about, who contribute to the deterrence of those who would threaten our way of life. It's because of our commitment to winning our nation's battles and giving our very best to those who defend our nation 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Our country's sons and daughters, because they deserve it. And with that concludes my comments. I really look forward to your questions. I want to thank you again for this valuable forum and this opportunity to share my thoughts with you. Thank you.
Sir, I will take the liberty while they're passing mics out there. You hear a lot in the press about the Expeditionary Advanced Base Operations. Maybe you can expound on what that actually is, and then perhaps tie in how big-ticket items like the F-35 and the CH-53K and some other things will fit into that.
Yeah, great question. So Expeditionary Advanced Base Operations, it was kind of, if you think back to, I would say, the 2017, 2018 timeframe, when our Commandant at that time, General Neller, looked at the future operating environment and said, you know, the Marine Corps is really not man-trained or equipped to fight in the future. Not that everything's broken, but there's some tools in our toolkit that we're missing. And there's maybe some new ways of fighting asymmetrically that we maybe need to do. And I will tell you, the fundamental concept behind distributed maritime operations, which I would call the naval concept, and expeditionary advanced base operations, which is the supporting concept, are that if you have massed formations in a future battle with the proliferation of sensing and the long range of fires, you introduce vulnerabilities to a force. So the whole idea is, how do you generate the capabilities that come from mass and the effects that come from mass while not exposing yourself to the vulnerability of concentration? And so DMO was written, Distributed Maritime Operations. Expeditionary Advanced Base Operations was written as a part of that. Essentially, being able to operate in a distributed fashion, high demands on CJAD C2 and the ability to command and control that formation, high demands, particularly at the Expeditionary Advanced Bases, on being able to execute mission command, because you're going to be, in TACSIT, 1, you're going to be like shut down, and you don't want to expose yourself electronically. And to be able to reinforce and support sea denial and sea control with the Navy. And I think, as you look at what Ukraine's doing there in the Black Sea, it's kind of a similar type of activity. Small units armed with the right equipment, being able to sense and make sense of the environment, pass it to the joint force, and enable the right bullet to hit the right target. It may not be our bullet, but we've got the, kind of our laser on the target. I would say the JTAC of the joint force. We got our laser on the target, and maybe it's an SM-6 off of a surface vessel. Maybe it's a hypersonic weapon off of an Air Force platform. Like, that's the idea behind Expeditionary Advanced Base Operations. It requires the right equipment in terms of capability. It requires the ability to maneuver and move, scoot and shoot kind of thing. And then it requires the ability to sustain. And a lot of our experimentation has been on, we've kind of got the shooting down, and we've got some near-term capabilities because we want to deliver capabilities to the fight. Naval Strike Missile comes to mind on our Nemesis platform. And we'd like to get a longer stick. We're looking at other weapon systems as well, looking with the Army. But you got to sustain and support that Expeditionary Advanced Base. So think of like small teams moving around, setting up in key locations where they can best support sea denial and sea control for the Navy. And there's a lot more to it than that, but it's a concept. Some people, and I'll do this, I'll talk about this one last thing, and then I'll go to the next question. They talk about EABO as like our doctrine. Maneuver warfare is the Marine Corps' doctrine. Expeditionary Advanced Base Operations is a concept that allows us to execute that doctrine in a new way. It's a new toolkit. It's not always the way we're going to operate. It's just, it enables the commander in the field another tool to employ to decisively engage the adversary. And I'll say, one of the things is we got to deter, right? And so if you start creating these strategic dilemmas for adversaries that are really hard to react to, particularly as we do EABO with allies and partners and things that they can't counter technologically, it creates strategic dilemmas for them and delays what their intent and desire might be. So hopefully that answers the question. Yes.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. My name is Indira Rice-Donegan. I'm the Chief Technology Evangelist for Red River Technology. And I want to be the first here in the room to congratulate the Marine Corps for being the first military branch to pass their full financial audit. I was the Chief of Budget for 3 years on the Joint Staff J6, so I know what a huge accomplishment that is. And I read some of the AAR comments from all the prep that was done to attain that achievement, and there was some really great tidbits there from the Marine Corps on leveraging different types of automation to avoid human error for future audits, et cetera, which is a great call for AI support, I think, and something I'd love to help out with. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on where the Marine Corps is leaning in that direction for future audit prep and how you look at leveraging AI in some of those areas as well.
Awesome, great question. And I take no credit for the audit. It was the Marines, the civilian Marines, all the folks out in the field, down to the Lance Corporal at the squadron who was breaking open a box of 50 cal ammo and counting, right? I mean, it was 2 years of very challenging effort. And so it was very manual. And I don't know if we have any accountants in the audience, but you don't want an audit to be done manually, particularly in a $42.3 billion account with globally, property all around the globe. So we transitioned as a part of the audit to a new general ledger called Defense DAI, and from Sabres to DAI, and that enabled us, because it had the right checks and balances in it in terms of accounting, to be able to execute the audit. But DAI is just for like payroll and I would say transactions. We have other systems, other general ledgers, if you will, for property, for ammunition, for buildings and grounds. And so all of those disparate information systems can provide the information, but if you're moving like information about the value of a building out of a system and then you're like swivel chairing it into DAI to get the audit, that's what we were doing. Like, I would say thousands of hours. And so we received 7 material weaknesses on our audit finding. 3 of the 7 are IT related, and 2 of the 3 are related to interfaces between our primary general ledger software and these other accounting softwares, so that it's easier to audit, because the computer will tell you that the audit, all the policies and the things that prevent you from making erroneous transactions are all preventable through software, right? But preventing that error. And so we're really focusing on, and we started the 24 audit like 2 days after we got the 23 audit finding, because we were a little behind. And we're really focusing on those interfaces between the systems. Now, some of our systems are built on the same kind of hardware. So DAI and GCSS Marine Corps are both Oracle products. And so we think there's some modules that we can activate inside of one or the other to automate that. And that's a big piece of our general ledger. But yeah, like anything we can do to automate that and put controls in place that allow us to not do bad transactions will allow us to sustain that audit opinion. Thank you.
And so let's give a big round of applause to General Adams. The good news, sir, as you leave the stage is there's plenty of questions out there still, so you've left them wanting. That's good.